Restoring cars, there's 1,001 handy tricks to learn. Especially when you get your hands on a vehicle that somebody else has had their hands on before you. This technique is called bread bagging. I invented it myself. When you've got parts that are covered in primer or overspray or excessive amounts of dirt, and it's going to take ages to clean them, what I do is put those parts into a bag full of thinners so that time and the environment can do its work rather than me having to scrub and rub and sand and strip. I just put things in a bag, put them in a warm place with thinners all around them, and a day later everything that I want off is just about ready to fall off. One handy little hint though, if you're working on plastic, do make sure that it's the kind of plastic that can be immersed in thinners without any problems. Shiny parts. Oh, I love the time of the job when I can start bolting on the new bits. These are direct from England, really cheap, very easy to fix, nicely made by Wipac. They've got stainless steel screws, nice little neoprene seals, and it's just so much nicer for a cost of $11 each to put new lights in rather than put up with faded or cracked 35 or 45-year-old lenses. This front end is going to look so much nicer with new lights. You saw in previous videos how much work I put into the prep on these front guards. This particular guard here, the left hand one, had something like 12 to 13 millimeters of bog in the front where it had been nudged and not panel beated out properly, just bogged over. So I've put a lot of work into all of this. When I bought the vehicle, it had a homemade front bumper on it that looked like something out of a Mad Max movie. I took the time to replicate a genuine Landrover bumper. The grille, I'm leaving that off until the very last minute. I don't want to risk damaging it because you can no longer get genuine grills. You can only get accessory type grills that don't have the word Landrover on them. Although most of the parts are totally available and relatively cheap, certain parts now are becoming hard to get. The little metal buckets in behind the headlights had their fine tabs around the outside edge rusted off down in the lower regions because water had sat in there. I had to spend a day restoring the little pressed steel headlight buckets that go behind the headlights. There's so much work that goes into a vehicle restoration. It beats me how people can afford to pay somebody else to do it. There are thousands and thousands of hours that get gobbled up on tiny little insignificant details. I bought this vehicle sight unseen. I bought it on the strength of 6 or 7 photographs. When I got it home, I found that the primer that they'd blown over everything was to hide the fact that everything apart from the seats and the windscreen and the tyres had been painted with green fence stain. Under the bonnet, the motor was green. These things here, look at the crud on them. The mud hadn't even been washed off when everything was painted green. I've spent weeks stripping this green paint off absolutely everything. The instruments, the seat vinyl, the floor, the chassis, even the exhaust system had been painted. It was as if they dipped the thing in green fence stain. Now here's a challenging job that I've had to spend half a day on. Would you believe that the rear tub is held on with JB Super Weld, super glue. There's these two bolts in the middle. I can't get my fat little fingers up in behind to hold the spring washer, the flat washer and the nut. So I've super glued all three of them together, and I'm now holding them in place with a magnet on a stick so that I can put the bolt through. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. These two have got to be the hardest to get to bolts on a Landrover, unless you've got hands the size of a 12-year-old girl. But after something like 4 hours, I achieved what I'd set out to do. Tease a spanner up behind it. And that's it. So happy. Here's my box of new lights and new clips and things. And under here we've got the bread bagging project. Everything that I've put into bags with thinners has been sitting in here for a day and should be a darn sight easy to clean. Just a rub now with some Scotch-Brite will get all of this glue residue off where somebody had left masking tape on these parts for too long. They'll be a quick and easy clean. I'm going to sandblast those. They're stainless steel, and I don't want the stainless steel look. I don't want them looking like accessories. I'm going to paint them the same colour as the roof, which is Landrover limestone, and with a bit of luck they'll fade away and look a little bit more like a standard part. Here's the dashboard ends that were covered in primer. You can see that faint grey look. I'll give those a rub with a soft wire brush and a Scotch-Brite, and that'll get all that paint off, and then I'll repaint them with satin black and they'll look as good as new. This is the bonnet stay. That's covered in crud, grease, mud and various layers of paint. The seat box is in an awful state. It looks as though somebody has tried to shove a new gearbox down through that hole in the top. It's horribly dented. Water's sat in the bottom and rusted it out. I've got a lot of cleaning here to do. The end panel was badly corroded, so I've split the spot welds and I'm going to be making up a new end panel. The inside's got a lot of rust. So here it is after a water blast, and now I'm in with the rotary wire brush getting all the loose paint off, because when it was painted fence stained green, nobody rubbed it down. The paint's flaking off left, right and centre. All of that has got to go. No point in putting good paint over the top of bad paint. I'll sandblast that steel part and get it clean. These nuts and bolts that hold the seat frames on, they're all going to come undone with the rattle gun, and I will put all those nuts and bolts into a tub of citric acid in water, and that will dissolve the rust, and within about 4 to 5 hours I'll end up with a nice clean bolt that can be put back in again. This is my water sandblaster. It blows water at high pressure, and in that water it carries sand. So it's not as brutal as a dry sandblaster. There's no dust problem, and the neighbours think I'm just mowing the lawn. So I've got the thing all stripped down. As I said, it was quite damaged in the middle. I don't know why, but it really does look as though somebody's tried to jam a gearbox down through that hole and then discovered that they couldn't, and that it has to be brought up from underneath. So I'll get everything tippy-tappied back into shape. Get into it with the sander. Give it the big sand and clean up. And then I can get a coat of primer on it and get it ready for some top coat. Here we are with a hammer and dolly, just flattening out the damaged flanges. I've mentioned in previous videos that this truck spent its entire life on one farm. It's not been used as a road vehicle, it's got really low mileage, but it has been well used. There were lots and lots of dents and damage that had to be repaired, but the great thing is, everything's complete. It's an entire vehicle with no missing parts. I've been working on it now for 3 months. I've done other things in the meantime. It hasn't been a solid 3 months, but when I do a day on it, I really do a day on it. It honestly is a good 8-hour day. Working outside doesn't make things easy. I've spent about 6 weeks doing inside jobs because it rained literally every day. Not all day, but it rained every day for the 6 weeks of the worst part of winter. Here's the floor panels. I've taken those right back to bare metal with the rotary wire buff, and now I'm going to give them a light coat of etch primer. It's imperative that you use etch primer on aluminium, otherwise paint will flake off when you water blast it in the future. It's just one of the things that you must do with aluminium. All you got to do is knock the gloss off. Just a light coat is plenty. After 2 or 3 coats of high build primer, I'll be ready for the 2-pack system that forms the finish coat. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know how people can afford to get a vehicle restored and pay to do it. What we're looking at here is literally 2.5 days work. For me to get this thing clean, repaired, primed and painted has taken me 2.5 days. That would have to be something like $1,000 if you were paying a tradesman. It's just nuts. Here's another tiny house and off-grid resources restoration tip. Citric acid. You'll find it in the kitchen or the supermarket. A couple of tablespoons of that mixed in with some water makes a really good acid for removing rust. It won't hurt the steel, but it gobbles rust. And it's fairly gentle on your hands too. I wouldn't recommend bathing in it. But it's a very cheap way of cleaning nuts and bolts. I'll leave those in there for a couple more hours. I've given them a rinse off. I'm now going to put them out onto a rag. And once I've got them nice and dry, I'll put them back into the container. There you go. I could have left it in longer, got all the rust off. But it's a fairly good result for just 2 hours. So they can go back into the container, and I'll give them a blast with Fisherline. Fisherline dries to a tacky clear finish which protects it and can be removed if necessary, but forms a durable invisible coating for bare steel. These are all my seat bolts. They hold the seat runners down. Now that's my next job. Get all of that stuff in. Ta-da! And once again, to give you some idea, from the time when I took this out to cleaning it up, painting it, refurbishing all the brackets, the nuts and bolts, putting it all back in, it's actually turned into something like 3.5 days work just on the seat box. Under the bonnet, things are looking pretty good. Almost ready for the motor. Outside, nice and shiny. I'll do a bit more work on the bonnet gap. Get the apron panel painted and fit the grille. But I will pull all these front panels off again when I fit the motor. It's not worth taking the risk of denting something while I put the motor in. I'll give the upholstery a wee tidy up, but next it's onto the doors. Yes, I've got 3 doors to restore. Rust repairs in the frame, new skins, and then prep them for paint.